Looks like it's go time. The door's been shut. We may see a few more people trickle in, but I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to the presentation on phased implementation success. How's the audio? Is it okay? Too loud? All right. My name is Clay. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and some I haven't met. So welcome to everybody. We're going to be talking about phased implementation approaches today. But before we get started, I want to do a quick poll, a few quick questions of the audience. How many people are already implemented in the crowd? Already implemented. How many people are pursuing a new implementation, even if it's a new plant or a brand new implementation in the room? Okay, a few. All right, so I want to make a few remarks. We're not going to be talking about software today. I'm not going to be showing any software. I'm not going to be showing any fancy Power BI charts or DataBridge Pro integrations or any new features. This is really more of a thought exercise, if you will, and a practical discussion about different approaches to implementing EAM. So it could be a little boring if you guys don't interact with me and raise your hands and ask some questions along the way, or maybe share some experiences with those that are here, because I presume everybody's here to learn the pros and cons of different ways to approach EAM. So those of you that have already gone down the path, it sure would be helpful to the rest of the people in the room to hear your thoughts and what you've learned along the way. So a little more background on me. I'm the founder and president of Stratum Consulting. You might have seen our booth here outside. This is our first year. We're very thankful to Alex for inviting us and encouraging us to attend. This show, I can tell you, is really hitting critical mass, and it's so great to see everybody from the EAM world here. We are a 22-year-old company, not quite as old as Digital Thinker, around about the same age. Showing a little long in the teeth here, I guess, but it's nice to see a lot of the old school partners here, and we're all in on EAM. That's what we all do all day, every day. So we're very narrowly focused, but deep in strength, and we'd love to have the chance to work with all of you in various capacities. So here's a little preview of the outline. We're talking about what we're here to do today. As I said, we'll be going through a few varieties of approaches you can consider for when you're implementing EAM, and maybe some pros and cons of each of those approaches. And then we'll move into some discussion about stakeholders and organizational change management, which is very critical, and we'll emphasize that. And then maybe some recommendations and some next steps for everyone. And then we'll wrap up with some final Q&A. But again, I encourage you to raise your hand, add commentary along the way. We try to keep this presentation as interesting as we can, despite the fact that we're not showing software today. So what are we here for? We're going to talk about 4 basic approaches that you can consider when implementing an EAM. And I think they would apply even if you're considering implementing a new plant or if it's a wholesale brand new implementation. Kind of talk about how to consider how to balance time, cost, value, and how the different approaches may differ in emphasizing one or the other. And I want to give you a little bit of a framework for thinking about the OCM side of the equation. And I'll keep coming back to that because I think it is very important. So what the key questions we're asking ourselves: how can we get the maximum value as quickly as possible for the least cost? Right? Have you ever heard the old adage, you can have cheap, fast, and good? Pick 2. It's kind of that same old story, right? You can't have one without considering the other, all right? And then what are the pros and cons that we have to deal with if we're going to approach one way of doing things versus the other? So if you've been around EAM long enough, you know it's a very, very broad and capable program. And it's grown tremendously over the years from, if you've been around back in the early days with DataStream, MP2, and Sidearm and all of those products, comparative to what EAM contains today, vastly different world. There's actually no way to implement all of EAM in one shot. It's impossible. There's no way to do it. So it's not a matter of if you're going to do a phased implementation, but how you're going to do it. There will be phased in some way, right? I mean, there's stuff in EAM that's just not applicable to certain industries, so you're not going to implement that. No one has the money or the time to implement, even 75% of the application. So we're here to talk about, given the fact that you will be phasing it in some way, what are the best ways to approach that, right? So I'm going to outline 4 approaches for you. We're going to talk about modular or module by module implementation. We're going to talk about functional, and I'll get into a little bit of the differences there with you. And then we'll talk about a pilot approach. All these are, pretty common. And then finally a hybrid. Of course, there's going to be a scenario where you kind of combine some of the attributes of the first 3. So we'll just call that hybrid for the moment. Before we get into that, let's talk about some complexities that you're going to encounter. And I'll say there's no one-size-fits-all here for anybody. But you're going to have to take into consideration so many things, culture, personnel, the state of the organization, but also, some that I've listed here. Is it a brand new greenfield implementation, first time? Those are so rare to have a brand new plant, fertile ground for a clean implementation, everyone's dream. We're going to paint our masterpiece here because it's never been done before and we have a clean slate. Those actually don't come around very often. So 1 in 100 maybe would be greenfield. So almost by definition, you're going to be cutting over from some prior system. So there's all the considerations of where you're coming from and where you're going to, right? What kind of time pressures are there? There's always something, and those are going to cause you to, I'm not going to say cut corners, but certainly maybe have to make some concessions about what you do or don't implement initially, right? You might be, you got to get off the old software because the maintenance is coming up on it, and you want to cut over and avoid that bill. Or you got to get live by the fiscal year end. That's another one we hear a lot because we're going to have a clean cutover from an accounting standpoint. Or it could be, we got another project right behind this one, so don't drag it out because we got plenty more work to do. I mean, you may have some other things to offer, but there's almost always some sort of time pressure involved in an implementation. And then there's, of course, integrations. If you're implementing materials management and supply chain functionality of EAM, you're almost certainly going to be integrating with a financial system. It wasn't always the case years ago, but these days, I would say that's probably the most common integration. People may want to differ in opinion there, but I would say a close second might be a SCADA. But integrations are going to have a lot of impact, I would say, or influence on what modules you're going to implement and in what order. But end of the day, it is really about your specific case. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to? And how are we going to phase in the modules or functions or what have you to meet your goals, right? Everyone is going to be unique. Everyone's special, right? I'm going to pause just for a minute and see if anybody has any killer insights for me just yet. Anyone? All right. So let's take that first approach. And this one really is, I'll admit, not all that common, but let's just approach it as a thought exercise. Imagine you had unlimited time to take your time and do the job right, and you could approach it module by module. And I'll just use as a visual prop the menu structure of EAM, which I have on the left. So maybe you could approach it by, let's do a really good job about bringing up the equipment master. Let's get a nice clean set of data. Let's get a great hierarchy, all the attributes and custom fields, classes and categories. Let's really do that right. That would be awesome. But in practice, I don't know that most people don't have the time to do that. But let's just keep going with the thought exercise for a minute. The benefit of being able to do that is really extreme focus on a given set of data, one at a time. So imagine, firstly, the equipment module. And then secondly, or maybe a little bit in parallel, you're bringing up the part master, right? Again, these two master data files, it's very important to get a clean set of data when you're setting those up, because they're gonna affect the reports downstream and all of the additional modules downstream. So focusing on those up front would be super nice. So again, imagine you had the time to do that really thorough job of lining those two out. Then you could move into work management from there. But once again, you've got the PM library you'd have to address. Again, making sure you have a clean, consistent set of preventive maintenance procedures. Then you could move into the inventory control functions of the system, and then on to purchasing. It would be a beautiful approach, but I'll admit, in practice, this one is fairly rare. And because of time pressures, you're usually not going to be given the runway, let's say, to approach it this way. People are going to want to have results more quickly, right? Anybody ever have any implementation where they pursued this course of action in the room? Anyone? Okay. All right. It is worthy of consideration, although in practical terms, it's not seen that much in the wild, right? But it could, in theory, yield you some quick wins, allow you to focus, especially the people part, get things set up in manageable chunks. That's really the benefit if you were to approach it in this fashion. Okay? Switching gears on you here to approach 2. Let's talk about it from a functional standpoint. This is kind of an old favorite of ours. We used to call it WOM and supply chain, right? Work order management and supply chain. It's kind of like you split it down the middle. You could approach work order management without regard to this other side. You could bring them up independently. And I think this one has a lot of value because you can really line out the business process in one side or the other and get some good focus. Complete end-to-end processes on either side of the house can be mapped. How many people approached their implementation of EAM this way? Is there anyone in the room that just brought up work management without the supply chain side? Everyone in the room did both? Has anyone did the reverse, that brought up supply chain side and then work management later? No? Okay, you guys are pros then. Oh, I like that. No, we like this one because it can simplify things and help the focus a little bit, I would say, on the functional side of things. We've got a little diagram here. This is how we've approached it in the past. So we call WOM, work order management. And we even subdivide that into reactive and planned or preventative. So imagine a scenario you're rolling out the work management part of EAM. We tend to first launch reactive. So get the people recording the things that they do day to day. You only need the equipment master to get this started. You don't need the PM library. You just need some basic codes and equipment, and you can begin tracking corrective work, which is, let's be honest, that's one of the harder things to get people building the habits on early on is really tracking that corrective work. There's always going to be some line. If the job takes 5 minutes or 2 minutes, you're not going to do it. But any substantial job needs to be recorded, coded, and put into the history so that we can do analysis on it. Once you get people having the reactive aspects of the program under their belt, then you can move to planned. You can start turning on the PMs and any other planned maintenance that you're doing. So you're kind of phasing in 2 pieces of work management. Again, you're not focusing at that time on supply chain. But again, put one piece under your belt, move ahead. Put the next piece under your belt, move ahead. Then, and this could have been in reverse order, but let's just go with the flow here. You could then approach materials management, which means bringing up your part master, organizing your storeroom, setting min-max levels, associating vendors and suppliers to your records, and preparing for replenishment, whether that's an integrated scenario or not. So there's the whole storeroom and materials management piece, and then you can move on to what we call P2P, procure to pay. So that's the replenishment cycle all the way from the min-max, generating a requisition through the purchase order, the receipt, all of that whole cycle, which again may involve integrations. Who would say that they approached their implementation of EAM more or less this way? One, we got one, all right, I like it. Okay, I'm curious to know, and maybe we'll ask the crowd in a little bit, if you haven't approached it this way, then perhaps the next one is going to be more popular. Pilot, right? Pilot. I think of all the scenarios I've seen, this may be the most common, especially for a broad organization. Like I know in the room, there's people here that have multiple plant sites. So this one's a good one. All right, you start with, let's just keep it simple and say we're starting with a single plant, right? And we have X number of plants beyond that. The benefit of the pilot is you get to focus on a kind of a small user base, right? It's obvious, that may be obvious, but let's just talk about that. The benefits of focusing on a small user base. Maybe you've got a maintenance team of 25, right? You got a manager, a couple supervisors, some leaders, and some techs. That really helps benefit because you have fewer people to train, fewer people to focus on from a change management standpoint, easier communications. So I think there's reasons why this one is pretty popular, right? The pilot. When you get that pilot launched, that is your first test case, and it's not going to go perfectly. We all know that. You're going to learn from that experience, from the pilot experience. You're going to learn, you'll be able to make adjustments, iterate, and roll out. So kind of the question becomes, and the challenges after the pilot is, once we get that under our belt, how are we going to move forward? If we have 50 plants, I don't think people are going to have the stomach for doing one by one. It's going to take a long time. So more than likely, you're going to have to diverge into a couple of work streams to roll that out. So the pilot may be easy, but it's going to get a lot more challenging when you're trying to scale it up. So that's the risks of the pilot approach. How many people in the room pursued a pilot strategy when they were rolling out? Okay, starting to get some more hands here. So I think, as I said, I think this one is very, very common. In reality, you're going to launch a set of capability, let's call it that initial platform of capability, and you're going to roll that out. That's not to say that you're launching the whole EAM system. You're not, but you're typically getting the core in place, rolling that core out to other sites, and hopefully eventually you're coming back around. You're going to implement new modules. Let's say like you might want to go and put a reliability layer on top as a second phase, or you might come do more advanced supply chain planning as a second phase. But generally you're going to launch that first basis of capability at each site in some sort of sequential order, right? Question, Tammy. Very, very good point. And yes, the answer to your question is yes. You wouldn't want to silo it, right? Definitely wouldn't want to silo it. There's a lot of background work that I'm not talking about here just yet, which is getting agreement on process, getting agreement on roles and responsibilities. All of that needs to be done at a broader level. So definitely making a good point. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about what you just said here in a minute. So thank you for that. Anybody else have any comments about doing a pilot? Any experiences to share of pros and cons? Glenn? I would say most commonly you're going to do kind of a status quo functional shift, if you will. So we want to make sure no one's going backwards in capability, of course. So To keep things simple, we're going to implement the same basic functions that they're doing today, but we might add just a little bit on top. They're going to want something new, so maybe we're going to put mobile in place. Maybe we're going to put some sort of analytics layer in place. There's going to be a little something extra. I mean, why are you doing this if you're just getting the same capability you had before? There's got to be something more, right? But we don't want to overcomplicate it to your point. You don't want to can't boil the ocean. So the organization only has so much appetite for change, so we're going to have to understand what that is. And I think our favorite is probably status quo, shift, and add mobile. That's probably the most common one, if that makes sense. A follow up for that? Does that help?
Yeah, I think just what the follow-up question was, when you bring a broader stakeholder audience, how do you stay away from analysis paralysis and serving, a wish list, if you will,
I want to contemplate that one for a little bit. I do encounter what you're talking about. I mean, there's two little dynamics there. It's nuanced. Analysis paralysis versus what we call the spin cycle. When you get close to a go live, people will start saying, oh, what about this? What about this? Can we add this? So those two things to avoid there, and they're different, right? I don't know if anybody on my team has any specific observations to share, but when I get through the hybrid, Glenn, I think it's going to address some of your questions. Mark. Yeah. You're going to have to draw the line somewhere. I mean, you can tell them you're coming back later for another wave, but you do have to draw that initial line pretty sharply. I also want to solicit some more opinions. Mark, I heard you say that you had selected one of the smaller sites as the pilot. Is that right? Yeah. We kind of debate, how do you choose the pilot site? And, there's a lot of considerations that go into that, but choosing a small site is not necessarily a bad choice, manageable, right? Another way to think of it is choose a high-performing site, somebody that's already adhering to best practices. They're doing the behaviors that you want the other sites to follow. So that's a common choice for the first site. So they can lead the way, show the way, if you will, to the other sites. I don't know if anybody else has had different experiences on that, but I think that those considerations will come into play with the pilot approach. And then there's kind of what we'll just call loosely hybrid. Some combination of these three things that we've talked about already. And again, it's going to be case by case. Everyone is different. Everyone is starting from a different point. Everyone will have mastered certain capabilities and not others. So again, there's no one size fits all. I can't meet you 5 minutes later, prescribe one of these approaches to you, but I can tell you that our current way of thinking is more of a hybrid, falls more into a hybrid approach. And I'll just share with you our current way of thinking. We call it the journey, right? So this is specific to the way we do things. Yes, this is kind of a marketing slide. I'm not here to sell you on Stratum. This is a thought exercise about how we approach implementation. So it's a journey. It's a path you will go down to implement. And we start you off very simply with what we call foundations, right? You have to implement basic blocking and tackling first before you can move ahead to the more complex plays, if you will, using football analogies here. So this gets back to your point, Tammy, about set the software aside for a minute. You have to get your organization to agree on what processes you're going to follow. What is the life cycle of a work order? Work ID, work planning, work scheduling, work completion, reliability analysis. You have to kind of lay the groundwork for the business process people are going to follow. And the same thing on the supply chain side. How do we conduct replenishment? How do we identify critical parts? All of that laid down in a series of workshops. Think Visio flowcharts, right? I think everybody in the room has probably experienced some sort of process analysis associated, or process design associated with their EAM implementation. How many people did that sort of work up front as part of their implementation? I'm not seeing as many hands as I thought I would see there. Okay? So starting out with establishing foundations is key. And then somewhat counterintuitively, we like to see people implement inventory first. And that's not necessarily natural for people. A lot of people, given their choice, would implement work first. But we've seen so many times that people have implemented work first with the intention of going back and picking up inventory, and they never did, right? So they end up being entirely a work management implementation, and they're missing half the picture, right? Half the cost picture, half the reliability picture. So getting inventory up and running first is challenging, but it's necessary for running a good work management operation in the future. You're going to have pick lists, you're going to have bombs, you're going to have material lists in order to manage work properly. So we try to insert that first on the roadmap and get people going on inventory, and then progress to work management. And yes, they can be done at the same time, so it doesn't have to be stepwise necessarily. But we want people to consider this as they're moving down their journey. So work management, of course, includes PM, corrective, reactive and corrective, all of the things that go into the work life cycle. So the reason those are colored in orange and the other two that are further down the road are in a different color is those first three are kind of what many people would consider a full implementation, maybe at the CMMS level, right? We can get our foundational work processes in place, we're managing inventory, we're managing work. You're doing pretty good. And but there's so much more beyond that now with EAM. Really the next waypoint we consider true asset management. And this is the point where you could consider bringing in RCM, reliability, root cause. This would be an ideal point to consider whether you're going to move down the APM path. All of those things require a certain level of maturity of the organization, and they require you to have a certain amount of data going in the system. So managing assets is not something you can really start with until you've attacked and mastered some of these prerequisites, if you will. And then even further down the road, we like to refer to that as managing capital. And by that I mean you have such a good handle on your asset base, you know where it lies on its life cycle, and you can predict with some accuracy how much longer it's going to last, and project it in the future that in 2030 we're going to be needing to replace these rooftop units and this generator and this such and such. If you get to that level of maturity, at that point you'll be engaging with the finance team, the budgeting team. They're going to be seeking your information for their budgeting and reserve replacement decisions. So that's super mature, really, if you can get to that. So I'll just pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions or comments on this kind of approach. Stunned, right? Stunned, all right. I hear you. So again, this is our approach that we have had a lot of success with. It is a hybrid, but I think you could consider this a little bit of a maturity-based implementation, a little more so than just saying hybrid. It's more of attacking pieces of functionality as the organization is ready in terms of data and functionality, and moving down the road through these waypoints as the maturity grows within the organization. Hopefully that's a fair statement. We have a way of breaking down those steps. Those 5 blocks on the top are the waypoints on my map from the previous slide. And each of those blocks can be further broken down, and even the A through N blocks, which that's an eye test. I know you can't read it from out there, but all of those are additionally broken down. So we have a very detailed set of check sheets of functionality that you can tackle, that you can check off, that will enable you to move to the next waypoint along the journey, as we say. All right? So if we are trying to optimize cost and risk and value and change management necessities, there's pros and cons to the different approaches. And as I said, module by module, move at a moderate speed. The cost could be pretty low, but integrating and not siloing those is probably the biggest risk. If you're taking the function-based approach, and that's the one I described as WOM, like work order management, and then supply chain functional, pretty fast ROI available there, but those are much bigger chunks. I mean, that's a huge step up above the module by module approach. I mean, you're going to implement the whole work life cycle, let's say, so there's a lot of process work to be done. If you later implement supply chain, you will have to come back through on another pass in work management so that you can integrate material concepts like material planning, pick list, critical part analysis, stock outs, those sorts of things. So you can't truly implement WOM and materials completely separately. They're inextricably intertwined in some way. So you will have to come back on that. Location or pilot based has got the benefit of a small first chunk, limited audience, easy containment. But then you ultimately have to answer the question: how are we going to roll this puppy out at scale afterwards? And what are the resources that are going to be required to do that? Right? And then finally, hybrid, which it's flexible, it's maturity based, but it is and can be more complex than the other approaches, right? There's going to be a lot of people involved at every step, and it won't be as contained necessarily as the other approaches. So there's always going to be trade-offs. And again, I won't be able to say this enough, it's really your specific case. It's going to dictate how you do it in the end. So this is the part of the presentation where I'm going to make a little confession. First, a question. How many people in the audience use like ChatGPT or some of those other AI tools that are out there in your day-to-day or your week-to-week? How many people think that is at minimum, a productivity enhancer? I think that's the way I see it these days. So I'll be honest, when Alex offered me this presentation a few weeks ago, I started dabbling and asking ChatGPT questions about, give me some top 5 bullets or whatever about phased implementations. It's as if I had an assistant. I was going to ask them to compile the first few slides for me, and then I could take it from there, right? And so I was pretty impressed, actually. I used the OpenAI ChatGPT, and it spat out, a handful of slides for me that I thought were pretty decent. But after thinking about what it produced for a while, it occurred to me that ChatGPT really didn't take into consideration the human factor, right? It was easy for ChatGPT to say module, functional, pilot, and hybrid. But ChatGPT doesn't understand that we're really talking about a people problem here. It's not just a software exercise, right? We say that all the time within our company. I mean, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but the software is the easy part, and the people part is the hard part, right? So I had to really coax ChatGPT to spit out anything that had something to do with the human factor, right? And if you've gone through this, hopefully you understand that can be the biggest challenge, is getting people to change and come along with you for the ride, right? So the next few slides, I'm really not talking about those 4 approaches. I'm talking about how do you engage people, the humans, right? So you've got to think about who the stakeholders are. Who are you going to be dealing with? You know, you've got the whole maintenance organization, all the way from superintendent, managers, supervisors, leads, and techs, right? All of them have a vested interest in success, but they're all different, right? So you could and you should think about each role in the organization and how they're going to be impacted, regardless of the approach you're taking. How are you going to communicate with them? How are you going to train them? How are you going to encourage them? And what's in it for them, right? Same thing goes for your supply chain staff. You've got purchasing managers, storeroom clerks, storeroom managers, same story. They all need to have at least a role-based plan for how you're going to implement the system. And then you got these tertiary people, those people, secondary level stakeholders. They're going to be impacted. They're going to be wanting data out, or they might be occasionally making an approval. So maybe they're not as central to the argument, but you still have to take them into consideration, even if it's just a cheat sheet or some sort of quick reference card or what have you. And then you got the executives and the upper management. They're going to be ultimately consumers of the data. I mean, the fruit of your labor ultimately is you're going to be able to send up performance data up the chain. So they're going to naturally have a stake in the game, and they're going to want to know what's in it for us at the end of the day. So it really comes down to some basic principles of organizational change management. You're going to want regular communications. You're going to want regular status updates. You're going to want signage. You're going to want T-shirts. You want to have a brand for your project. You want to be able to create some excitement around it. So all of those are things we see that fall kind of in the OCM bucket, if you will, that keep the cadence, keep the communication, keep the message going throughout the project, make it regular, right? I don't know if anyone has got any specific experiences about how OCM or communications has helped them, but I know it's very important. Does anyone have a story to share about that? No? Okay. Yes, Alex. Thank you, sir.
So we're working with a company right now who's coming off of a very dated legacy system. And been on it 30 plus years now. And so we have 14 sites that we're going to be implementing the AMN, but the number one cause for concern is the change management of the legacy system. Those have never seen it before. They're very, 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 very opinionated about central center. And they love it. And big corporates have got to go down and all that support. So I think that's one thing we
No, thanks for those comments. I mean, it can be some extremes there. You can have my legacy system when you pry it from my cold dead fingers. You know, people are reluctant to give up on something they've spent 10, 15, 20 years mastering. It's challenging, of course. Tim? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're not speaking. Exactly. Those stories of people that were initially reluctant and then become converts are so satisfying. Oh my God. Yeah. Question back. Let them rant.
I'm gonna piggyback off Amy here. not easy, but that wide piece component is directional. So military and the war.
One thing that why we use is that they're able to actually, have that space to ask the question and get an answer to the data that's in the final we use for that. That's what we kind of just, and I'm just looking at it and then see like anything that's that is after that. Something really that kind of going around and you get focused on that. It's a way to understand, I don't know, maybe how you think about what it is that you like to do,
So thankful to y'all for sharing those. And there's two little nuggets there in what both of y'all are saying, and we characterize them a little bit differently, but people need to feel heard. They need to feel heard, every level. They want to know that you heard their objections, their challenges, all of that stuff. And they're just that simple thing, like the safe space to feel free to talk about it is a huge benefit. And the other is what we call the WIFM. You probably heard the acronym for. What's in it for me? And it's really the why that Alex is getting at. What it's not going to be even for everyone. And by that I mean when you switch systems, not everyone is going to be necessarily 20% more efficient or have less data to do or less interaction. It's going to be lumpy. Some people are going to have a better experience and some are going to have more to do. So you may have to anticipate those that are required to put more data in. Why are they doing that? Why are they having to do that? What is the benefit of this extra data? Because there's a cost to it. There's a cost in people's time and maybe a cost in people's frustration for entering more data. So being able to anticipate that future state and what's in it for them, these users of yours, is kind of key as well. So being heard and the WIFM. So I know we're running up against a little bit of a time limit here. I got just a few more slides, but thinking about organizational change management, there's a few key aspects of it I think you should keep in mind. One is obviously leadership. You want this to be presented from the top down as an organizational initiative. Everyone at the top has approved this project. They want this project. It's going to benefit the organization, and that message needs to flow down to every level of the organization. If they don't think leadership is bought in on it, then they won't buy in on it. I mean, then that should be fairly obvious. So there's the leadership aspect of it. And then there's the readiness aspect of it. So we've kind of touched on this topic already, but you really do need to think about all of the roles, maintenance manager, maintenance supervisor, tech, that are going to be impacted by the rollout. Understand what their specific challenges might be based on where they are now, where they're going, and develop a plan for them and make sure that they're ready as much as they can be for the change that's coming. And then, of course, there's the communications. And people do a variety of approaches of this, but generally, the more the better. All right? You want to communicate that the project's coming, communicate where we are each week, communicate any benefits that have been realized along the way, and communicate the successes at the end. And ideally, tune those messages as you go. Not just boilerplate stuff, but very specific messages about where you are in the project. Because those can be very, very valuable. And again, I'll mention posters, T-shirts, a branded project, all those little things that may not seem much, they can help you really increase the buy-in of a given project. And then as I said, there's the WIFM, the what's in it for me. So once again, evaluate all the roles and where they're going to be in this future state and the why and what the benefit will be. So for a maintenance tech, it might be that you have fuller implementation or fuller information at your fingertips, easier ability to look up work history, the ability to operate on a mobile and not be tethered to the desk. Those are just some examples of what the WIFM might be for a given role. And so there's a few more slides you might consider appendix material. Everyone that has attended today will get a copy of this. So I hope some of this material will be helpful to you. And I'll just pause here for the next couple of minutes because we do have a Q&A we're right on the time for the Q&A session. And I'm thankful for everybody that's already contributed their experiences, but I wanted to open up the floor to see if there was any other questions we could talk about. Any last commentary? Glenn. I think, and Stephen could probably help me here, but I think up front there's usually a pretty big discussion about ROI and how we're going to achieve it. I think there's less, to be honest, less measurement after it's all said and done to see that it happened, but management wants to be sure that the potential to save time or money is embedded in the project. I don't know if you have any other words of wisdom for me around that, Stephen, but. Appreciate the question. Thankful to all of y'all for attending Streamline this year, and I hope you're having a good time and a good experience, and we'll see you at another talk here. Thanks for your time today.